Hey guys, Jim here with another video for you. This is Ranking the Filmography, Kevin Smith. But before we begin, at the end of this video, if you like what you see, please consider giving me a thumbs up, a possible subscribe, but most importantly of all, leave comments below. Let me know how you feel about Kevin Smith's movies, how you feel about my rankings in general, or if you have any questions at all about him, because I know in the UK he is not as prominent as he is here in the United States. Now, Kevin Smith is a very interesting person in Hollywood. He broke out in the 90s around the same time that Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez and Steven Soderbergh, even though he had broke out a couple of years earlier. But this whole new crop of independent filmmakers that not only directed their films but also wrote the dialogue. But unlike Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith was more of just dialogue. He directed his own movies, but he would be the first to admit that he did not have any kind of visual style whatsoever. He was just more or less interested at the beginning of just getting a movie made, and then he just felt lucky to continue to do so. But he was more of a writer than a director than the other two, although Quentin Tarantino is certainly one of the greatest, film writers of his generation. Anyways, he's released 14 films that he's directed. I own 13 of them. The one that I do not own is Yoga Hosers, which I saw once and I will never watch again and I will never buy. That movie's a piece of shit. And unfortunately, a lot of Kevin Smith's work is very divisive, including with me. I absolutely love the beginning of his career, and then he unfortunately kind of fell off the cliff. There are some more high points after that initial run, but, well, you'll see with my rankings. So we've got 13 films. We're going to go from 13 all the way down to 1. We're not going to go into plots too much, except when necessary. So I hope you enjoy this, and let's start. With number 13, the bottom of the bunch, Cop Out, starring Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan. This is the only film that Kevin Smith ever directed that he also did not write the screenplay for, and it shows. This movie is horrible. Apparently, Bruce Willis was a complete douchebag on set. Him and Kevin Smith, although they hit it off great when they worked together on Die Hard, Live, Die Hard or Free, or whatever the hell it is, the fourth one. Kevin Smith had a small role in that movie. And apparently the two of them hit it off great. And then when they worked together, let's just say they did not get along and they did not talk for years. When the diagnosis that Bruce Willis came out recently of his health problems, Kevin Smith did reach out to Bruce Willis to mend the fences and has gone on record saying that maybe a lot of the time it wasn't just Bruce, it was him as well. So, but this movie's a mess and it is not funny and it's god awful. So number 13 is Cop Out. Number 12, Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. This came out in 2019. And again, it's not as bad as Cop Out, but it's pretty bad. At this point, I think that he's just gone to the well too much, along with the next film on my countdown. You'll see. But again, very disappointing film. There are some laughs in this movie, but a huge, huge disappointment from the previous installment. Number 11 is Clerks 3. His most recent theatrical film. This came out right after the pandemic. I did not see this theatrically. It had a very, very limited release. I bought it as blind buy because I absolutely adore the first two Clerks movies. And quite honestly, I do not like this movie much at all. I don't hate it. A lot of people really hate this movie because the tone is completely different than the other two films, and I understand that because Kevin Smith is a different person now than he was 20 years ago and 30 years ago when he did the other two installments. But quite honestly, this movie, I've got massive problems with it, and I'll get into that more on the next installment of Years in Film 2022. But as it is, Clerks 3 is ranked number 11. Number 10, Tusk, starring Michael Parks, Justin Long, and Haley Joel Osment. I covered this back in the Years of Film. What is it, 2014? Yeah, 2014. This is the one where it's a horror movie where a guy turns another guy into a walrus. The genesis of this movie was on his podcast. Kevin Smith and his partner on the show, Scott Mosier, who used to or still might produce his work. I don't think he does anymore, but the two of them are good buddies. But their podcast at the time, they used to like to get high and answer, questions from people. And somebody said, "Hey, what is the weirdest thing that you've read about?" And he said that he read a story about some guy up in Canada who had a very strange relationship with a walrus. And the two of them started talking back and forth on there, and they started goofing, throwing snowball ideas around about, hey, wouldn't it be a really wild horror movie if some guy grabbed a guy and turned him into a walrus? And that was the genesis of this movie. It's very gross. It's very weird. It's not for everybody. Again, I don't love this movie at all. I don't even really like it all that much, but I do kind of admire the effort, and there are things about this film that I like. Number 9, Red State, starring John Goodman and Kevin Pollak and Michael Parks and Melissa Leo. This is a really intense movie. This was his first crack at what he called a horror movie. To me, it's more of like it starts off like a horror movie, like a Hostel type movie. But then it turns into something else. And it's a very intense movie. Michael Parks and John Goodman both are very good in this movie. I just don't like the ending. I just don't like the ending. Other than that, again, I don't think this is a great movie by any stretch, but it's decent. I'm glad I saw it, and I got this in the bargain bin at Family Video back in the day for like $2. So that's Red State. Next, Jersey Girl, starring Ben Affleck, Liv Tyler, Jason Biggs, the late great George Carlin, and a special appearance by Will Smith. This was Kevin Smith's first attempt at making a mainstream movie that didn't have anything to do with the characters from his previous films. And unfortunately, this movie tanked at the time because this was when Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez were going out, the height of J-Lo, and she makes a small appearance in this movie. Again, not a great movie, but this movie definitely is not as bad as people say it is. It does not deserve the hate that it gets. It's a solid film. Okay, from here on out, we're getting the stuff that I really do like. And some of it, as we get further down the list, I absolutely adore and love. But this one is in the really, really like station, and that's Mallrats. This was his second film. This was the follow-up to Clerks. Huge flop at the time. And I've always liked it. This particular edition from Arrow has two versions, the theatrical cut and a much longer extended cut. Now, I'm the type of guy who normally really enjoys extended cuts. Not in this case. The theatrical cut is definitely superior in my eyes. It's just tighter. It's funnier. Too many weird subplots in the second director's cut. But again, Mallrats, it's not a great movie, but it's a lot of fun. Then we've got Zack and Mary Make a Porno, starring Seth Rogen, Elizabeth Banks, so many others, Craig Robinson, and Tracy Lords, who was an adult film actress back in the 80s and almost single-handedly brought down the porn industry back in the 80s. I worked in the video store at the time. Google it. I'm not going to go into details here, but let's just say that I have always had a weird relationship with Tracy Lords. But regardless, Zack and Mary Make a Porno. It didn't get a lot of marketing at the time because it had the word porno in it. As you can see, this Blu-ray just says Zack and Mary. I bought this at Walmart when it came out. And this was kind of Seth Rogen's first flop. Most of his movies were big hits at that time. He had just come off of Knocked Up and 40-Year-Old Virgin. And Kevin Smith says that he felt like he destroyed Seth Rogen's film career, even though the two are still very good friends. This movie's funny as hell, okay? I really like it. It's a little predictable, but again, it's got a great cast, and it's very funny. Okay, now we're getting into the stuff that I absolutely adore. We have, and I'm sorry that that's just the disc. 3 of my Kevin Smith movies come in a multi-pack, and this is one of them. Chasing Amy, starring Ben Affleck, Joey Lauren-Adams, and Jason Lee. This was his 3rd film, and it was his most mature film to date, and it's a really good movie. People have asked him for years, when are you going to make a science fiction movie? Because he's such a Star Wars geek. He says that he did make a science fiction movie. It's called Chasing Amy, because it's a love story between a lesbian and a straight man, and he says that's about as science fiction as it gets. But Chasing Amy it's a great movie. Probably the most controversial pick on my list, I'm sure, to a lot of people, is Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. This was the first of his meta movies for sure. This came out in 2001. I think this movie is absolutely hysterical, but if you haven't seen his previous movies, this movie would not make a bit of sense. So I get the hate that a lot of people have for this film. But I do. I absolutely love this movie. Me and my wife have a very special relationship with this movie. Hashtag boo boo kitty fuck. I love this movie. Okay, we're down to the top 3. Number 3 is Clerks 2. This was released in 2006, I believe. Yeah, 2006. And it stars Jeff Anderson, Brian O'Halloran, Rosario Dawson, and Jason Mewes. This came out basically 10 years after the original installment. After saying that he was not going to go back to the well after Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, he did. And at first, when I heard about this movie coming out, I was excited to see it because I love the original, but I kind of thought it was a cash grab. And then I saw this movie with a friend of mine who is no longer with us, unfortunately. And the two of us laughed hysterically for an hour and a half and got teary-eyed at the end, because this movie is kind of a miracle. It is a filthy, filthy movie with a lot of dick jokes and a lot of gay jokes and a lot of... It's sophomoric at best. It's the only movie that has a donkey show in it that also has a heart of gold. I love this film. Number 2, Clerks, the original. This was his calling card. This came out in 1994. I covered this in the years of film in 1994. Pretty extensive. I also included it in my top 25 of the decade because Clerks is one of the best films from that decade, period. I love this film. But my number 1 favorite Kevin Smith movie, and this would have been included in the top 25 of that decade in the 90s, Dogma. Unfortunately, I did not include my DVDs with that initial run up until the 2000s. This was definitely his most controversial film. It's his best cast film. It's my favorite film of his, and it's his best film in my opinion. You could see the cast right there. Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Salma Hayek, Jason Lee, the great Alan Rickman, Chris Rock, so many others. This was a very controversial film when it came out. People were picketing it without seeing it, kind of like what happens now. This was before cancel culture, but this was the beginning of the internet. And people got, just like with the Last Temptation of Christ a decade earlier, the far-right religious people started picketing this movie without seeing a single frame of it, thinking that it was going to be the most blasphemous thing ever. And you know what? Like the Last Temptation of Christ, this movie had an actual impact on me in between, in this case, all the dick and fart jokes, because again, this movie's very sophomoric. But it's got something to say, and it's a great, great film. I'm not religious at all. I love the message of this film. It's not anti-God at all. It's pro-God. It's pro-faith. It's pro-belief. It's anti-bullshit organized religion comes up with. And again, I'm not going to get political or try to crap on anybody's religious views here, but I love this film. So let's wrap this up. Number 1 is Dogma. Number 2 is Clerks. Number 3 is Clerks 2. Number 4 is Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Number 5 is Chasing Amy. Number 6 is Zack and Mary Make a Porno. Number 7 is Mallrats. Number 8 is Jersey Girl. Number 9 is Red State. Number 10 is Tusk. Number 11 is Clerks 3. Number 12 is the Jay and Silent Bob reboot. And last is Cop Out. So I hope you enjoyed these picks. I hope you enjoyed these rankings. Again, in the comments below, if you have any questions at all about any of these films, please let me know. And let me know how you feel about my picks and what your rankings would be. But until the next time, I hope everybody is doing well, and we'll see you on the next one.